The air inside the terminal was heavy, thick with the mixed smells of strong coffee, cheap perfume, and the metallic tang that always seems to hang around big, busy airports. It was a Tuesday afternoon, which usually meant the place should have been manageable, but today it was a different story. Every single gate seemed to be overflowing with people. The intercom system was crackling with constant updates, voices overlapping one another until the noise became just a buzzing wall of sound. Travelers were sprawled on the floor, sitting on their suitcases and pacing back and forth, everyone checking their watches and phones with nervous energy. Standing near the large floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the tarmac was a man who seemed completely separate from the chaos. He was wearing a well-worn black leather jacket, a simple t-shirt, and jeans that had seen better days. On his feet were a pair of scuffed boots. A dark baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes, shielding his face. To anyone walking past in a rush, he looked like just another weary passenger trying to get from point A to point B without any trouble. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't complaining about the delay. He was just watching the luggage carts zooming around outside the glass, his hands resting comfortably in his pockets. This was Keanu Reeves. Despite being one of the most famous actors on the planet, he possessed a unique ability to disappear into a crowd. He didn't have a team of security guards surrounding him. He didn't have a handler shouting orders. He was traveling alone, carrying a single backpack that looked like it had been with him through years of adventures. He enjoyed these moments of anonymity. In a world where everyone was constantly connected and constantly performing for an audience, Keanu cherished the quiet times where he could just be a regular guy waiting for a plane. As the time for boarding approached, the energy near the gate shifted from restless waiting to active stress. The gate agents, tired from dealing with angry travelers all day, began to organize the line. One agent in particular looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she kept rubbing her temples between scanning boarding passes. She was doing her best to manage a situation that was quickly spiraling out of her control. The flight had been overbooked, a common but frustrating reality of modern air travel, and there were far more people with tickets than there were seats on the plane. Keanu stood patiently as the line began to form. He didn't try to cut ahead, even though he could have easily pulled rank or demanded special treatment. He waited for his group to be called, just like everyone else. When the announcement finally came over the speakers, a low murmur went through the crowd as people gathered their belongings. There was a shuffle of feet, the zipping of bags, and a general sense of urgency as everyone rushed to get in line, fearing that there wouldn't be enough overhead space for their carry-on luggage. He drifted toward the back of the line, keeping his head down. A few people nearby glanced at him. Some did a double take, their eyes widening slightly as they recognized the actor from movies like The Matrix or John Wick Asterisk. You could see the thought process on their faces. Is that him? No, it can't be. He looks too normal. He's just standing there. But because he carried himself with such a lack of ego, because he wasn't wearing flashy clothes or demanding attention, most people eventually decided it must just be a lookalike. They turned back to their phones, leaving him to his peace. This was exactly how he liked it. He could observe the world without the world constantly staring back at him. The line moved slowly. It was a crawl. Every few feet, the line would stop entirely, and the crowd would let out a collective sigh. Keanu spent the time watching the people around him. He saw a young businessman frantically typing on a laptop, looking stressed. He saw an older couple holding hands, the husband looking confused while the wife tried to read the departure screen. He saw a mother trying to calm a crying baby, rocking the stroller back and forth. These small human moments interested him. He saw stories everywhere he looked. As he got closer to the front of the line, the tension at the counter became visible. The gate agent was typing furiously on her keyboard, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. She was shaking her head slightly, muttering under her breath. The passenger currently at the counter was raising their voice, demanding to know why their seat assignment had changed. The agent apologized profusely, but her patience was clearly wearing thin. It was a tough job, dealing with hundreds of people who were tired, hungry, and anxious about missing their connections. Keanu watched this with a look of sympathy. He knew that getting angry rarely solved problems in these situations. It usually just made things worse for everyone involved. Finally, it was Keanu's turn. He stepped up to the counter, placing his worn passport and boarding pass on the sleek surface. He offered a small, polite smile to the agent. "Hi," he said softly. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the shouting and rushing that had filled the air just seconds before. The gate agent didn't look up at first. She was too focused on her screen, her fingers flying across the keys. "Boarding pass, please," she said automatically, her voice sounding robotic from repeating it 1,000 times that day. Keanu gently slid his documents forward a fraction of an inch. "Here you go," he replied. The agent grabbed the passport, flipped it open to scan the page, and then typed in the information from the boarding pass. For a moment, there was silence, save for the hum of the computer. Then she stopped typing. She stared at the screen. She hit a few more keys, then stopped again. A confused look washed over her face. She glanced down at the name on the passport, then back up at the computer, then down at the passport again. It was in that moment that she realized who was standing in front of her. Her eyes went wide, and she actually took a small step backward, her hand going to her chest. She looked up, her eyes meeting Keanu's. The recognition was instant. The actor didn't flinch. He didn't try to hide or look away. He just smiled that same gentle smile, waiting for her to process what was happening. Mr. Reeves," she stammered, her voice dropping to a whisper. She looked around nervously, worried that other passengers might hear and cause a scene. I didn't realize." "It's okay," Keanu said, his tone reassuring. "Please take your time." "I know it's busy." But the agent's relief at seeing a celebrity quickly faded into a look of panic. She turned back to her screen, her fingers trembling slightly as she tried to fix whatever error was popping up in red letters. She clicked the mouse furiously. She bit her lip. The line behind Keanu was growing restless. People were starting to shuffle their feet and cough. The pressure was mounting. After what felt like a long time, but was probably only 30 seconds, the agent stopped. She looked at Keanu with a genuine look of regret and distress. She took a deep breath and prepared to deliver the news she knew he didn't want to hear. "Sir, I am so sorry," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "But there is a problem with the reservation system. The flight is significantly oversold. We are at capacity. We have to bump passengers to the next flight and—" "Well, your ticket is one of the ones flagged." She paused, searching his face for anger. "I'm afraid the cabin is full. You can't board." The words hung in the air. "You can't board." It's a phrase every traveler dreads. It means delay. It means uncertainty. It means your plans, whatever they were, have been ruined by a computer algorithm. Most people in Keanu's position might have snapped. They might have pulled out the celebrity card, demanded to speak to a manager, or made a scene about how much money they had spent on the ticket. The people in the line behind him were already leaning in, sensing a conflict. They had their phones out, ready to record a Keanu Reeves airport meltdown video, but Keanu didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even sigh. He just looked at the agent, who looked like she was on the verge of tears, terrified that she had just ruined the day of one of Hollywood's biggest stars. He looked past her through the glass where the plane was sitting at the end of the jet bridge. Then he looked back at her. His reaction wasn't about himself, it was about her. "Okay," he said simply. He nodded his head, accepting the reality of the situation. "These things happen, don't worry about it." The agent blinked, stunned by his kindness. Are you sure?" "I can try to find another solution, but it might take a while." "It's all right," Keanu said, picking up his passport. "I'll wait. Do what you need to do for everyone else." He didn't argue. He didn't demand an upgrade. He just stepped aside, moving out of the line so that the next person could step up. He walked over to the large windows again, the same spot he had occupied before, and leaned against the wall. He adjusted his backpack straps and went back to watching the planes. The crisis at the counter continued. The shouting resumed, and the stress levels went back up. But Keanu remained an island of calm in the middle of the storm. He had been told he couldn't board, but his reaction set the stage for something much more important than a flight schedule. The moment Keanu stepped away from the counter, the space he occupied was instantly filled by another impatient traveler. It was as if the crowd was a single, living organism that couldn't tolerate a gap for more than a second. The no boarding verdict hung in the air for a brief moment. but the machine of the airport moved on immediately. The agent, flustered and apologetic, turned her attention to the next person in line, forcing herself to push down the panic of having just turned away a movie star. Keanu didn't walk far. He moved to a large pillar near the floor-to-ceiling windows, leaning his shoulder against the cold metal. He crossed one foot over the other, settling in. He was now an observer. From this vantage point, he could see the entire gate area. It wasn't a pretty sight. What had been a noisy, restless crowd was morphing into an angry mob. The news that the flight was oversold was spreading like a ripple effect through the lines of people. He watched a businessman in a sharp gray suit checking his watch for the 10th time in a minute. The man was pacing in a small circle, his phone pressed to his ear, arguing with someone about a meeting he was going to miss. Nearby, a teenager was slumped in a chair, headphones blasting music, completely oblivious to the stress around him. But mostly, Keanu saw anxiety. It was written on the faces of the elderly couple clutching each other's hands, and in the frantic typing of a student trying to rebook a connection on a laptop. The atmosphere grew thicker by the minute. The air conditioning seemed to struggle against the heat generated by so many bodies packed so tightly. The smell of the gate area, a mix of fast food, body spray, and cleaning fluid, became overwhelming. The intercom chimed again, the sharp ding cutting through the murmurs. The gate agent's voice came on, tight and strained. She announced that they were looking for volunteers to take a later flight in exchange for a travel voucher. She promised a hotel room if the next flight wasn't until the next day. Silence met her offer, then a low grumble of discontent. No one wanted to volunteer. Everyone had somewhere to be. The grumble grew louder, turning into shouts of how much. And when is the next flight? The agent held up her hands, trying to calm them down. But it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a broom. Keanu watched all of this with a quiet intensity. He noticed the micro-expressions on people's faces. He saw the way the agent's hands were shaking slightly as she typed. He saw the way a mother picked up her toddler, holding the child tight as if to protect him from the negative energy filling the room. It was a study in human behavior under pressure. Most people were looking out for themselves, worried about their own luggage, their own schedules, their own comfort. Then, the mood shifted from general impatience to a specific, sharp crisis. A young woman had pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She wasn't pushing to be rude. She was moving with the frantic energy of someone who has run out of options. Keanu's eyes locked onto her. She looked terrible in the way that only pure exhaustion and grief can make a person look. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, strands falling loose around her face. Her eyes were red and puffy, as if she had been crying for days. She was clutching a crumpled boarding pass in one hand and a phone in the other. She wasn't looking at her phone, though. She was just gripping it tightly, her knuckles white. "Please," she said to the agent, her voice trembling so badly it was hard to hear her over the noise of the terminal. "Please, you don't understand. I have to get on this plane." The gate agent looked up, her expression a mix of fatigue and sympathy. "Ma'am, I understand, but we are at capacity. The door is about to close." "I can't let anyone else on." The woman shook her head violently, tears spilling over her cheeks. "No, you don't understand. It's my father. He's in the hospital, the doctors say. They say he doesn't have much time. I have to get there. I have to say goodbye." The gate area went quiet for a second. The shouting stopped. The businessmen stopped pacing. Even the teenager took off his headphones. Everyone was listening. It was the kind of raw, human moment that cuts through the noise of everyday life, but the silence didn't last. The reality of the situation, a full plane, a strict schedule, airline policies crashed back down. "I am so sorry," the agent said, and she looked like she truly meant it. "But there are literally no seats. Everyone on this plane has a seat. I cannot physically put you on it." The woman let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She slumped against the counter, defeated. It was a heartbreaking sound. She looked back at the crowd, scanning the faces, desperate for someone to offer a solution for a miracle. But the crowd just looked back. People felt bad, sure, but not bad enough to give up their own seats. They had meetings and vacations and families to get home to. The logic of the crowd was cold and immovable. Keanu felt a tightening in his chest. He knew that feeling of desperation. He knew what it was like to receive bad news and feel the world spinning out of control. He had lost people he loved. He knew the pain of not getting to say goodbye, or the fear of missing that final moment. While he was just standing there with a backpack, waiting for a later flight, this woman was fighting against time and losing. The argument at the counter escalated, not because the woman was being aggressive, but because the gate staff was trying to follow protocol while the woman was living a tragedy. A supervisor stepped out from the back office. He was a tall man with a badge on his chest, looking official and stern. He touched the woman's arm gently but firmly. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside. You're holding up the boarding process. We have to close the door." "Step aside," she cried, her voice rising in pitch. "I'm telling you my father is dying." "Doesn't that matter?" "It matters," the supervisor said, his tone clinical. "But I can't invent a seat. Please step back so we can finish loading the aircraft." The sheer unfairness of the moment hung heavy in the air. Here was a person in need, and the system, rigid and unfeeling, was pushing her away. The crowd began to murmur again, but this time it was uneasy. People were shifting on their feet, looking away. They didn't want to watch this. It was too real. It was too painful. Keanu looked at his own boarding pass, which was now invalid in the computer system. He looked at the plane sitting outside the window, connected to the building by a long, accordion-floored tunnel. That tunnel was the only link between this woman and her father, and it was blocked by a technicality. He watched the supervisor trying to guide her away. She was resisting, her body shaking with sobs. "I'll sit anywhere," she begged. "I'll sit on the floor. I don't care about baggage. Just let me on." "We can't do that," the supervisor said, losing patience. "It's a safety violation. Security." The mention of security sent a jolt of fear through the onlookers. Now this wasn't just a sad story, it was becoming a scene. A security guard started walking over, hand resting on his belt. The situation was spiraling out of control. The woman was about to be escorted away, not just from the gate, but perhaps from the terminal entirely. She would be dragged off to a private room, calmed down, and then sent to a hotel or a rental car, arriving hours too late. Keanu looked at his watch. The jet bridge door was still open. The final passengers were trickling down the hallway. There were literally minutes left, maybe less. If he was going to do something, it had to be now. He couldn't fix the airline's overbooking problem. He couldn't change the hospital report. But he could change the math of this specific moment. He looked around the gate. There were people with first-class tickets who were scrolling through social media, looking bored. There were people in coach who were complaining about the snacks, but no one was moving. Everyone was waiting for someone else to solve the problem. The woman was now sobbing openly, covering her face with her hands. The supervisor was signaling the security guard to move in. The agent looked down at her counter, unable to watch. The cruelty of the modern world was on full display, rules over people, schedules over suffering. Keanu took a deep breath. He pushed himself off the pillar. He didn't march forward angrily. He didn't shout, "Stop!" Like a character in one of his action movies. He just started walking. He moved through the crowd with a steady, deliberate pace. He wasn't just a guy waiting for a flight anymore. He was a man with a purpose. As he walked, the crowd seemed to part for him, sensing a shift in the energy. He didn't look at the security guard. He didn't look at the supervisor. He kept his eyes on the agent behind the counter. He knew that she was the one with the power to override the computer, at least for a moment. She was the one holding the keys to the jet bridge door. The woman was still crying, her back to Keanu as he approached. She didn't notice him. She was too lost in her own world of pain. The security guard was stepping closer, his expression stern. The tension in the air was tight, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Everyone in the gate area was watching now, sensing that something was about to happen. The mundane annoyance of a delayed flight had transformed into a dramatic human struggle, and Keanu Reeves was walking right into the center of it. The next 10 minutes were not just going to change the woman's life. They were about to redefine the atmosphere of the entire terminal. Keanu didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked with a steady, calm rhythm that cut through the noise like a knife. Every step he took felt deliberate. His old boots made a soft, thudding sound on the carpeted floor, a sound that was almost lost in the chaos of shouting passengers and the harsh beeping of scanners. But he moved with a purpose that made people turn their heads. It wasn't the purpose of a superhero in a movie rushing to stop a bomb. It was simpler than that. It was the purpose of a human being who saw a wrong thing happening and decided to make it right. As he got closer to the commotion, the details became sharper. The young woman was still leaning against the counter, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders were heaving up and down with every sob. It was a sound that went straight to the heart, a raw, ugly sound of pure despair. The security guard was now right next to her, his hand hovering near his belt, looking uncomfortable. He didn't want to hurt her, but his job was to keep the line moving. The supervisor was standing there with his arms crossed, looking at his watch, his face a mask of annoyance. To him, she was just a problem that needed to be solved so he could get back to his schedule. Keanu stopped just a few feet away from them. He took a second to look at the woman. He noticed the way her hair was sticking to her wet cheeks. He noticed the worn-out fabric of her coat. She looked like she had been traveling for days, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. He didn't see a disruption to the flight schedule. He saw a daughter who was terrified of losing her father. The security guard looked up and saw Keanu standing there. For a second, the guard looked confused. He recognized the face, of course. Who wouldn't? But his brain couldn't quite process why a movie star was standing in the middle of this stressful airport mess. The guard opened his mouth, probably to tell Keanu to step back for his own safety, but Keanu spoke first. "It's okay," Keanu said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. It had that deep, grounding tone that makes people stop and listen. "I can handle this." The guard hesitated. He looked at the supervisor, then back at Keanu. Something in Keanu's eyes, a calmness, a lack of fear, made the guard lower his hand. He took a small step back, giving Keanu space. It was a silent acknowledgement that maybe this situation needed a different kind of authority than a badge. Keanu turned his attention to the supervisor. "Hey," Keanu said, nodding at him. It was a greeting between equals, even though their statuses in this world were vastly different. "Can we stop for a second? Let's breathe." The supervisor blinked, caught off guard. "Sir, we have a flight to leave. We can't just stop." "I know," Keanu said gently. He gestured toward the sobbing woman. "But she's not trying to cause trouble. She's trying to get to her dad." "We can all hear that. There's no need for security." The supervisor looked at the woman, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing a human instead of a hassle. His shoulders dropped a little. The anger in his face softened into uncertainty. "We still can't let her on," he muttered, though his voice lacked its earlier bite. "There are no seats." "That's what I want to talk about," Keanu said. He turned to the gate agent. She was standing frozen behind her computer, her eyes wide. She looked terrified that she was about to be fired or that she was witnessing a meltdown. Keanu gave her a small, reassuring smile. It was the kind of smile that says, "I'm not the bad guy here. We're on the same team." "You told me I can't board," Keanu said to her. It was a statement of fact, not a complaint. The agent swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, I'm sorry, the system bumped you. There are no seats left. But the plane is still there," Keanu said, pointing out the window to the large aircraft visible through the glass. "The door is still open. The jet bridge is still connected." "Yes, but—" "And she needs to get on," Keanu said, turning his head slightly toward the woman. She had lowered her hands now and was looking at him, her eyes swollen and red. She was sniffling, trying to control her breathing, but she looked at him with a mixture of confusion and hope. She probably knew who he was, but in her state of shock it didn't seem real. To her, he was just a stranger in a leather jacket stepping in to help. The agent looked between Keanu and the woman. "Sir, I wish I could help, but I can't pull a seat out of thin air. Everyone on the manifest has a seat assigned." Keanu nodded slowly. He looked down at the boarding pass in his own hand. It was a simple piece of paper, but it represented a choice. A choice between his own convenience, waiting a few hours for another flight, and someone else's desperation. Most people in his position might have thought, "Why should I give up my seat? I paid for it. I have a right to be on that plane. That's the normal way the world works. We look out for ourselves. We protect our own interests." But Keanu's mind worked differently. He knew that the seat, to him, was just a comfortable chair that would get him home a few hours sooner. To the woman standing next to him, that seat wasn't a chair. It was a chance to hold her father's hand one last time. It was a chance to say the words that needed to be said. The value of that seat wasn't the same for both of them. For her, it was priceless. He looked at the time. The agents were preparing to close the door. The next few minutes were critical. If he stood there and thought about it too long, the opportunity would be lost. The door would click shut, the bridge would be pulled away, and the plane would push back from the gate. He made his decision. It wasn't a struggle. It didn't require a debate in his head. It was the only thing that made sense. If he had the power to fix this, and he didn't use it, then he was part of the problem. And he didn't want to be part of the problem. He wanted to be part of the solution. He took a step closer to the counter. The crowd behind him had gone completely silent. Hundreds of people were watching this unfold. Phones were being held up, cameras recording, but nobody was speaking. The drama of the airport had paused, and all eyes were on the interaction at the counter. They sensed that something rare was happening. "Take my seat," Keanu said. The words were simple, but they hit the room like a thunderclap. The agent froze, her mouth opened slightly. "What, take my seat?" Keanu repeated. He held out his boarding pass toward her. "Give it to her, I'll take the next flight, or the one after that." "It doesn't matter," the supervisor stepped forward. "Sir, that's very generous, but we can't just swap tickets like that at this stage. The manifest is set. The weight and balance calculations are done. It's complicated." "It's a seat," Keanu said, his voice firming up just a fraction. He wasn't angry, but he was determined. "I'm a passenger." "She's a passenger. Just swap the names in the computer. You guys do this all the time, right? Upgrades, changes." The supervisor looked at the computer, then at Keanu, then at the crying woman. He saw the tears on her face. He saw the genuine plea in her eyes. And he saw Keanu Reeves standing there, offering up his own comfort without a second thought. The rules were important, yes. But humanity was more important. Even the most rigid bureaucrat has a heart, and sometimes the heart has to overrule the rulebook. The supervisor let out a long breath. He looked at the agent. "Can we do a same-day transfer? Override the bump?" The agent's fingers were already flying across the keyboard. I think so. If he volunteers, it releases the seat back into the pool. Then I can reassign it immediately." She looked up at Keanu, her eyes shining with tears now. "Are you sure? You understand this means you'll be stuck here for hours." "We don't have another confirmed flight until tomorrow morning." Keanu shrugged, a small, humble shrug. "I've got nowhere to be," he said. It was a lie, of course. He had a life, a job, things to do. But compared to what she was facing, his schedule was meaningless. "I've got a book to read. I'll be fine." He turned to the woman. She was staring at him, shaking her head in disbelief. "No," she whispered. "You can't. That's your seat. I can't let you do that." "Please," Keanu said softly. He looked her right in the eyes. "Go see your dad. That's what matters right now, not me." "Not the seat. Just go be with your family." The woman broke down again, but this time it wasn't a sob of despair. It was a release of tension, a sob of relief. She reached out and squeezed Keanu's arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you so much." "Don't worry about it," Keanu said. He gently patted her hand. "Just go." The agent typed the final command. The printer spat out a fresh boarding pass. She handed it to the woman. "You're on," she said. "Seat 4A run, go now." The woman grabbed the pass. She looked at Keanu one last time, trying to memorize his face, trying to find the words to express her gratitude. But there were no words big enough. She turned and sprinted down the jet bridge, disappearing into the tunnel that led to the plane. Keanu watched her go. He felt a lightness in his chest. The heavy, suffocating tension that had filled the gate area just minutes ago was gone. The crisis was over. The woman was going to make it. That was all that mattered. He turned back to the counter. The agent was wiping her eyes with a tissue. The supervisor was looking at the floor, looking sheepish. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," the agent said. That was really something." "It was nothing," Keanu said. He adjusted his backpack. "Just doing what anyone would do." But they all knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would do that. Most people wouldn't. Most people would stand by and watch, feeling bad but doing nothing. Keanu had stepped up. He had used his privilege not to get ahead, but to lift someone else up. "Now," Keanu said, looking around the quiet gate. "About that hotel voucher you mentioned." For a few seconds, the entire gate area felt like it had been placed inside a vacuum. All the noise, the shouting, the complaining, the clicking of luggage wheels, the repetitive announcements over the intercom, seemed to fade away into the background. The only thing that felt real was the empty space where the young woman had been standing just moments before. She was gone now, running down the long, narrow tunnel of the jet bridge, sprinting toward a chance to say goodbye to her father. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't an angry silence anymore. It was a stunned silence. The mood in the terminal had undergone a massive shift in just a few short minutes. Only 10 minutes ago, this was a place filled with stress, selfishness, and anger. People were only looking out for themselves, but now the air felt different. It felt lighter. It felt like humanity had returned to the room. Keanu stood by the counter, his hands resting lightly on the edge. He watched the open door of the jet bridge, waiting for the sign that she had made it. He wasn't looking for applause. He wasn't looking for a thank you. He just wanted to know that the solution had worked. He wanted to know that the system hadn't won. Behind him, the crowd of passengers was waking up from the trance. People started lowering their phones. Hundreds of small screens went dark as recording stopped. The man in the gray suit, who had been pacing and shouting on his phone earlier, was now standing still. He looked at his phone for a moment, then at Keanu, and quietly put the device in his pocket. The argument he was having seemed unimportant now. The teenager with the loud music took his headphones off completely, sensing that the vibe had changed. The gate agent was the first to move. She let out a long, shaky breath that she seemed to have been holding for days. She looked at Keanu with a mixture of disbelief and profound gratitude. Her eyes were still watery, rimmed with red from the stress of the situation. She couldn't believe what had just happened. In her years of working for the airline, she had seen passengers scream at her, threaten her, and throw things at counters over much smaller issues. She had never seen anyone, let alone a celebrity, calmly hand over their seat for a stranger in distress. "Okay," she whispered to herself more than to anyone else. "Okay, she's on." The door is closing. Through the glass windows, everyone watched the ground crew. A man in a high-visibility vest pulled the lever on the jet bridge door. It swung shut with a heavy thud that could be felt through the floor. Then, the fingers of the bridge retracted, pulling away from the side of the plane. The seal was broken. The woman was on board. She was safe. She was going to make it. Keanu let out a small nod. "Good," he said softly. The supervisor, who had been so stern and rule-focused just minutes ago, looked like a different person. His authoritative posture had slumped into something more humble. He looked at the computer screen, then back at Keanu. He realized that he had almost been part of a tragedy, and this actor had stepped in to stop it without making a scene. The supervisor felt small, and he felt grateful. He wanted to fix this. He needed to fix this, not just for the airline, but for his own conscience. "Mr. Reeves," the supervisor said, stepping forward. His voice was much softer now, stripped of the bureaucratic toughness. I don't even know what to say. That was incredibly kind. We don't see that kind of thing here." Keanu turned to face him. He adjusted his backpack strap, looking relaxed. "It's all right," he said. "You guys have a hard job. I know you were just doing what you're supposed to do. No hard feelings." The supervisor shook his head. "We still need to make this right for you. You can't just give up your seat and get nothing in return. It's against policy, and frankly, it's not fair." He started typing rapidly on the keyboard, printing out new slips of paper. The printer whirred to life, spitting out crisp white boarding passes and bright red vouchers. The supervisor gathered them up, straightening them against the counter to make a neat pile. "We have a policy for involuntary denied boarding," the supervisor explained, his voice professional but eager. "Since you were technically bumped, and now you've volunteered to stay behind, you are entitled to the maximum compensation. I've printed you a voucher for a future flight. It's worth $1,000. It's transferable, so you can give it to a friend if you want. I've also booked you on the first flight out tomorrow morning." And he added, sliding a piece of paper across the counter, "Here is a voucher for a hotel at the airport. It's a nice one. The airline will cover the room, plus dinner and breakfast." He pushed the stack of papers toward Keanu. It was a lot of value sitting there on the counter. To most people, getting a free hotel and a $1,000 flight voucher would be seen as a huge win. It was a silver lining to a bad day. Keanu looked down at the papers. He picked up the hotel voucher. He looked at the name of the hotel. It was a fancy place, much nicer than the airport floor he had been prepared to sleep on just an hour ago. He picked up the flight voucher. He read the amount. "Thank you," Keanu said. He meant it. He appreciated that the supervisor was trying to help. "Please take it," the supervisor insisted. It's the least we can do. Keanu held the vouchers in his hand. He stood there for a moment thinking. He looked past the counter out into the seating area. The crowd was starting to disperse a little, realizing that the drama was over. But not everyone was leaving. There were still people stuck in this terminal, people whose flights were canceled or delayed, people who were tired and broke and far from home. His eyes landed on a family sitting a few rows away. It was a father and a mother with two young children. They looked exhausted. The father was counting out crumpled dollar bills and coins, trying to buy snacks from the vending machine, but he came up short. He shook his head, put the money back in his pocket, and told his kids they weren't hungry. The mother was bouncing a crying baby on her knee, looking like she was about to collapse from fatigue. They weren't causing a scene, they weren't demanding anything. They were just trying to survive the delay. Keanu looked back at the vouchers in his hand, $1,000, a free hotel room. He didn't need it, he had money. He had a comfortable life. Giving him a free hotel felt like giving a sandwich to someone who had just eaten a feast. It was a waste of a good favor. He looked at the supervisor. "You said this is transferable?" Keanu asked, holding up the flight voucher. "Yes, sir," the supervisor nodded. "You can give it to anyone. And the hotel voucher. Can someone else use that?" "Yes, absolutely." Keanu didn't hesitate. He didn't make a big speech. He didn't stand on a chair and announce what he was doing. He simply took the flight voucher and the hotel voucher and held them out toward the gate agent. He slid them back across the counter, away from himself. "I don't need these," Keanu said. The agent looked confused. "But, sir, this is for your trouble. You're staying overnight. You need a place to sleep." "I've slept in airports before," Keanu said with a small shrug. "I've got my backpack. I've got a book. I'm good. Really." He pointed a finger gently toward the family with the two young kids. The agent looked over her shoulder and saw them. She saw the tired father and the crying baby. She saw the stress on their faces. "Give the hotel room to them," Keanu said, "and maybe see if you can get them on that flight tomorrow morning with me. If there's an extra seat, use this voucher for them." The agent's mouth fell open. She looked at the vouchers, then at the family, then back at Keanu. You want to give your compensation to them. They look like they need a bed more than I do," Keanu said simply, "and a hot meal wouldn't hurt either." The supervisor looked like he might cry. He nodded vigorously. "I can make that happen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can definitely make that happen." "Thanks," Keanu said. He turned away from the counter then. His part in the play was done. He didn't want to stick around for the thank yous or the paperwork. He just wanted to go back to being invisible. As he walked away from the counter, the atmosphere in the gate shifted again. This time it wasn't just silence, it was admiration. People watched him walk past. No one stopped him for an autograph. No one held up a phone to record him. They just watched him with a quiet respect. It was as if they realized that asking for a selfie would break the spell of what they had just witnessed. They let him pass. He found a spot against the wall, a little further down from where he was standing before. It was near a power outlet, which was a prime spot in an airport. He leaned his back against the cold wall and slid down until he was sitting on the floor. He pulled his backpack onto his lap and unzipped it. He took out a paperback book, an old detective story with a cracked spine. He opened the book and started to read. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the massive engines of the plane roared to life. The ground crew pulled the chocks away from the wheels. The huge vehicle began to move, inching back from the terminal. The woman was on that plane. She was safe. And the family across the hall was about to get a surprise that would turn their terrible day into a blessing. Keanu turned a page in his book. He was just a guy sitting on the floor at Gate 12, reading a novel, waiting for a flight. But to everyone else in that terminal, he was the proof that even in a cold, crowded, and selfish world, kindness still existed. He hadn't just boarded a plane. He had lifted the hearts of everyone who saw him. And as he sat there, quietly reading, the terminal felt a little less like a machine and a little more like a community. The huge engines of the airplane roared to life, shaking the floor beneath Keanu's boots. Through the thick glass, he watched the massive vehicle slowly inch backward, away from the terminal building. It was a strange feeling, standing there on the ground while the person who had taken his seat was up there in the sky, heading toward something incredibly important. Only 10 minutes ago, that plane was just a machine to him, a way to get from one city to another. Now it felt like a vessel of hope. He watched it until the tail turned and it began to taxi toward the runway. A quiet sense of peace settled over him. He didn't feel the frustration of a delayed traveler anymore. He felt the satisfaction of a problem solved. Inside the gate area, the world was starting to move again, but it was moving differently now. The sharp, aggressive energy that had filled the room earlier had dissolved. It was like someone had let the air out of a tense balloon. People were still tired and they were still stuck in an airport, but the anger was gone. The crisis that had held everyone hostage, the fear that they might be next to be kicked off, or that they would miss their connections, had been replaced by a lingering sense of awe. Keanu turned away from the window and walked back to his spot against the wall. He sat down on the floor, crossing his legs in a comfortable position. He pulled his backpack onto his lap and fished out his book again. It was a beaten-up paperback, the kind you buy in a second-hand shop for $1. To anyone else, sitting on the floor of a terminal might have looked undignified, especially for a person of his status. But Keanu didn't care about dignity. He cared about comfort. The floor was solid, the wall was sturdy, and he had a story to read. That was enough. Meanwhile, the gate's supervisor and the agent were still standing at the counter, looking at the stack of vouchers Keanu had left behind. It felt like holding gold. They looked at each other, then over at the family Keanu had pointed out. The supervisor straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and walked around the counter. The agent followed close behind, holding the paperwork. The family was sitting a few rows away, looking defeated. The father was rubbing his temples, his eyes closed. The mother was trying to quiet the baby, rocking the carrier back and forth with a tired, rhythmic motion. The two young children were curled up on the dirty carpet, using their backpacks as pillows. They were fast asleep, exhausted by the long day of travel. "Excuse me," the supervisor said gently. The father opened his eyes, looking up with a wary expression. He expected bad news. He expected to be told they had to move again or that their flight was canceled until next week. "Yes," he asked, his voice rough. "We have an update," the supervisor said. He crouched down so he was at eye level with the father. He didn't want to talk down to him. "That gentleman over there." He nodded discreetly toward Keanu, who was already absorbed in his book. He gave up his seat for another passenger who had an emergency. The father looked over at the man in the leather jacket. He did a double take. "Is that?" "Yes," the supervisor whispered. "And because he volunteered, the airline gave him these compensation vouchers, a hotel room for the night, dinner, breakfast, and a flight credit for the future." The supervisor held out the envelopes, but he refused to take them. "He asked us to give them to you." The father stared at the envelopes. He looked at his wife, whose eyes had gone wide. "To us," she asked. "But why?" "He said you looked like you needed them more than he did," the agent said softly. "The hotel is just upstairs. It has real beds, it's quiet, and we can put you on the first flight out in the morning, guaranteed." The father reached out with a shaking hand and took the vouchers. He looked at the value printed on them. It was more money than he had in his pocket. He looked back at Keanu. The actor hadn't moved. He was just turning a page, scratching his chin, completely unaware of the impact he was having from across the room. "I don't know what to say," the father whispered. Tears welled up in his eyes, not from sadness this time, but from sheer relief. The weight of the day, the fear of not being able to afford a hotel, the stress of sleeping on the floor with two kids was suddenly lifted. "Please. Thank him for us." "He doesn't want thanks," the supervisor said, standing up. "Just enjoy the hotel. Get some rest." As the supervisor and agent walked away, the father wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders. They held each other, looking at the vouchers as if they were a winning lottery ticket. The children stirred but didn't wake up. For the first time all day, the parents smiled. It was a small, fragile smile, but it was real. The ripple effect continued to spread through the gate. Other passengers had watched the exchange. They saw the family getting the vouchers. They put the pieces together. The celebrity, the emergency boarding, the generosity. A man standing near the vending machine looked at the candy bar in his hand, then looked at the tired security guard standing nearby. Instead of complaining about the price, the man walked over and handed the guard a bottle of water. "You look like you could use this," he said. The guard, surprised, thanked him. It was as if Keanu's act of kindness had unlocked something in the people around him. The terminal, which had been a place of every man for himself, suddenly felt like a community. People started talking to each other. A woman offered her charging brick to a teenager whose phone had died. Two businessmen who had been arguing over armrest space 5 minutes ago were now sharing a newspaper. The atmosphere had been transformed, not by a new policy or a manager's announcement, but by one simple choice made by one person. Hours passed. The busy afternoon rush faded into the quiet of the evening. The bright fluorescent lights seemed to dim, or maybe it was just that the mood was softer. The gate area emptied out as other flights left. Finally, it was just Keanu, the cleaning crew, and a few other stragglers waiting for the early morning flights. Keanu sat in the same spot, his back against the wall. His book was finished, resting closed on his knee. He was just looking out the window at the dark tarmac where the runway lights blinked in the distance. He looked peaceful. He didn't have a phone in his hand. He wasn't checking his status. He was just being. A young airport employee with a broom came by, sweeping up dust and discarded receipts. He slowed down as he approached Keanu, recognizing him but trying to act cool. "Hey man," the employee said quietly. "You need anything? A pillow? A blanket?" Keanu looked up and smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "No, I'm good." "Thanks for asking, though. You sure you've been here a while?" "I'm sure," Keanu said. "I've got a jacket. It's not so bad." The employee nodded, impressed. He swept up a small pile of trash nearby. "That was cool, you know, what you did earlier with the lady." Keanu looked down at his hands. "Just needed to be done." "Yeah, well," the worker said, leaning on his broom, "most people wouldn't have done it. They would have yelled until they got their seat." "Yelling doesn't help much," Keanu said softly. "Usually just makes you more tired." The worker laughed. "True that." He hesitated for a second, then decided not to ask for a selfie. It didn't feel right. The moment was too calm, too respectful. "All right, take it easy, man." "You too," Keanu replied. He watched the worker walk away, then shifted his position, getting comfortable for the night. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the cold wall. He thought about the woman on the plane. He hoped she made it in time. He thought about the family in the hotel, hopefully sleeping in soft, warm beds right now. He thought about the gate agent, who had gone from tears to smiles. He realized that he had missed his flight. He was going to spend the night on a hard floor. He would be tired tomorrow. His back would probably hurt. But despite all that, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. There is a strange weight that comes with having everything: money, fame, success. It can make you feel isolated, like you are living inside a bubble where nothing is real. But today, the bubble had popped. He had connected with people. He had used his luck to help someone else's bad luck. He had felt useful. The announcement board flickered above him. The gate for his new flight in the morning was already posted. He had a long night ahead of him, but he wasn't worried. The terminal was quiet now. The shouting was gone. The chaos had settled. Keanu Reeves pulled the collar of his jacket up around his neck to block out the slight chill of the air conditioning. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. He was just a man in an airport, waiting for the sun to come up. But the story of what happened in those 10 minutes, the refusal to board, the swap, the generosity, would stay with everyone who saw it long after they left the gate. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't a script. It was just real life, messy and beautiful, reminding everyone that sometimes the most important trips we take aren't the ones on a plane, but the ones we make toward each other. He drifted off to sleep there, sitting up against the wall, while the city outside the windows continued its busy, restless life, unaware that a hero was resting in its midst.